Welcome to part 3 of our sewing series, where we are walking through and sewing through our little apron. Today I want to talk about interfacing. I've mentioned it before, but it's important. There are different types of interfacing. There is a very light interfacing that you use for very light fabric. See how you can see through it? And this is a stiffener that goes in between your material of something that you want to keep stiff and crisp, like the band that goes around the waist. You would use this on extremely light material. Of course, here's some heavier stuff. This is really heavy. You can't even see through it. And I might use this for my waistband because I think I want my waistband to stay really crisp. But there are many types. There are many different stiffnesses, and you would refer to your pattern. We tell you on your pattern if you're to use lightweight or heavyweight or medium weight interfacing. Most interfacing comes with a shiny backside. I don't know if you can see it. It's shinier on this side as opposed to this side. And that is glue that is activated by the heat of your iron. So you would cut this out, put it on the wrong side of your fabric, and then iron it down, and the glue would activate and it would hold this interfacing in place until you get a chance to sew it. And so that's really good to have. Today I want to show you also how to lay your pattern on your fabric. By the way, you want to pre-shrink your fabric because it will shrink. And if you do it afterwards, you may have some pieces shrink more than the other pieces, and then your finished product, or your finished apron will not lay right. Okay, these are the materials that I picked for my pattern, and I'll walk you through why I picked them. One of the main reasons were they were on a great sale. So always look for sales, look for bargains, because it's going to make your project cheaper, of course. I really liked this fabric, especially for a little girl. Isn't that pretty? Nice pink flowers, blue background. What little girl's not going to like this, right? And then this made me think of like your outdoor This made me think of rattan or fencing. So like, well, those two will go together because this is outdoorsy. This is beautiful flowers from the outdoors, and we'll stick it along with this. And then, of course, what do you need if you have beautiful flowers? You need bees, right, to pollinate your flowers. So that's what I chose. I chose this for my bottom piece. This will be the larger apron. This will be my complementary smaller apron that goes on top. So you'll just see little bits of this. This will be the main look. And then my pockets will be the little bees. And they're just ready to go pollinate all these flowers. And that's my contrast. Remember I was talking about contrast before, where you're using different styles, different patterns, different colors, but they go well together. You can see that my bottom piece has a lot of pink and white in it. And I look through this and I can find the pinks and the whites, so we know these go pretty well together. And of course, the yellow is for the yellow in the flowers. So we know that all this put together will look nice. Be careful too with your patterns. If you're using a big pattern, don't do all big and don't do all small. You want to switch up your pattern some to give it another type of contrast. So I've got a smaller weave here It looks like a weaved basket, doesn't it? And then, of course, the larger flowers. And then we go back down to the little bees. And this one is not quite as busy as this. So you always want to look for that contrast if you're doing contrast. Now, if you just want to make your whole apron out of just this fabric, well, then that is an apron with no contrast. And that's okay, too. Some people just like it like that. And that's all right. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you now some tips on laying out your pattern. This is the pocket pattern. There's an arrow that runs on your pattern piece, and that's important because that arrow always runs along the grain line. It doesn't matter what the shape of your piece is. It matters where the arrow goes. And remember from last time, we talked about finding our grain line. Our grain line runs along this selvage edge. This is the selvage edge. We don't use this. It gives us information about the manufacturer and the colors that are in our fabric. And this will be cut off. We won't use it. But we use this as a guide to find out which way our grain line runs. And it always runs parallel with your selvage edge. So if I were to lay down this pattern piece and I see the arrow lays this way, I would want to make sure that I'm laying the arrow parallel to the grain line. Here's a trick. You don't want to just lay it on your fabric either, because if you don't get this exactly laid down right, say it's a little bit crooked, it doesn't run quite as parallel, you will have a crooked piece. We don't want that. We want it to be exactly parallel. And one trick to help you with that, by the way, I'm old school. I use straight pins, but there are weights that you can put on top. If you just go to your local sewing store, there's many pieces, there's many types of things you can use to hold your pattern piece down while you cut around it. But I find good old pin works for me, works best. So, here's a clue. I'm going to measure from my arrow line. Here's a line. It's a very narrow line. Hopefully you can see it. If not, just trust me. Then I place make sure your whole pattern fits on the fabric. It doesn't go over onto the selvage edge. You want to make sure it's actually inside that. I am going to then measure from that line over to my selvage edge, and I see it is 1 1¼ it's 1¼ inches to that selvage line, to the edge of the selvage line. I'm just going to put a little pin there. By the way, I'm not going to cut the pocket out of this fabric. It's the other fabric, but I'm just using this to show you. And then I go down to the other end of that line. I measured up here, across. I'm going to go to the other end of that line and measure across. And I make sure it says the same 1¼ inch. It'll be different on yours. Not everything's going to be 1¼ inch. So don't get fooled by that. It's just whatever it measures, you do it here across and here across. It has to be the same measurement. Okay, now that I have my measurement at 1¼ inches, 1¼ inches, I know that my pocket is sitting absolutely correct on my grain line. I pin that in place, of course. That'll hold it there. And then you can go around pinning the rest of your pattern to your fabric, or laying down the weights or whatever it is you're using. Okay, so now I know my pattern is sitting correctly on my fabric. And when I cut it out, I won't have a wonky piece. It'll be perfectly along the grain line. Of course, my little bee pattern, now pre-shrinking my fabric, I put it in the washing machine. Some people like to wash it with soap, you know, just put it through a whole cycle. You can do that if you want. I'll either put it in my washing machine and just get it really wet and then stick it in the dryer and shrink it up. Or you can really wet it in your sink and wring it out and then put it in your dryer. It's the heat that's going to cause your fibers to shrink down and seize. And we want to get that done now. We don't want to do it later. On here, on this fabric, which will be for my pocket, it's harder to see the selvage edge, but it is. On top, you can't really see it because the pattern just lays right over it. If you turn it on its back side, then you will see the selvage edge. So I know that my grain line runs this way. And I can sort of see a little bit of different color. It's a little bit lighter than the rest of the fabric. But if you're unsure, just turn it over and look at it. Find that grain line. You're like, okay, yes, this is the way I'm supposed to lay down my pattern pieces. And of course, this is what I would cut my pocket out of. Now, another clue. On my pocket pattern piece, it tells me how many pieces to cut. It says, this is cut 2 of them. So that lets me know I'm supposed to cut 2 of these pockets. And you can either cut it like this and then take it over and cut it like this. Make sure you have enough pieces cut. Or I like to fold it over, lay it the right side down, fold it over. Well, you can really see the selvage on this side. Get a nice, good. You want to make sure this is even also. I'm going to take from the edge of this and over to the fold. That's 7 inches. Okay, I'm going to try this down here. Is this 7 inches also? Nope. It's a little more than 7 inches, so I'm going to make this 7 inches as well. Now do I have 7 inches? Nope, a little bit more. Back up and check here again. Still not at 7 inches down here. I got to go bend this, pull this side out just a little bit more so that my fold is the same. There's 7 inches. And here's 7 inches. So now I know this piece is laying correctly. There's enough fabric that is running along the grain line. If I were to not be careful about that, and I'm just going to fold it over. Look what would happen then when you would cut your piece. It would, once again, you'd be like, well, how do I find my grain line on that? Well, you can't do that. You got to make everything even. So it's worth it to take the time. And this is just a short way to cut 2 pieces of fabric that are going to be exactly the same. Let's get this back over to 7 inches. And trust me, don't try and eyeball it. Measuring is way more accurate than trying to eyeball. Okay, we're going to measure again. 7. Measuring again. This is still a little bit too big. Okay. So we know we have a perfect 7-inch piece from here to here on all ends. It's even. Now I can lay my pocket down and I can see, you can see where the 7 inches is really too much fabric. You can even measure over more. You can take a little less of your fabric. Let's see, how much fabric will I need? Let me measure my piece. Well, my piece is 4 inches, but I'm going to need a little extra. So let's try 6 inches. 6. And sometimes you can get it right dead on. Okay, there you go. So I would lay my piece down. I would find my selvage edge. In this case, you can see along here. This is the selvage edge right along here. And we would just measure our grain line. Once again, here's our arrow. And we put our measuring tape on that line and go over, and I see I've got 4 3/4 inches. Oops, let me move it up. I can use, measure again. I got 4 3/4 inches. I'll put my pin there. And another, whoop, see, now it's off just a little bit. So we got to put right on that line. Yep, there we go. Smack dab where we're supposed to be. All right. Well, that's a little wonky, isn't it? Okay. And then you would continue to go around and pin it or put weights on it, whatever you choose to do. Now there's many options to cut. By the way, make sure you have a dedicated sewing scissors. Do not use it on anything else but your sewing. I'm going to tell you why. Because if you use this for anything else, you will dull it. And then you can't cut your fabric very well. And, you know, you have to go get it sharpened, and that's just more to pay for, and we don't need that. This will cause just a straight cut. It's regular scissors, sewing scissors, dedicated. I can't stress that enough. There is also scissors called pinking shears. And you see how they have teeth? It will cut your fabric with teeth. This is supposed to help your fabric from fraying. Fraying means, like what you can see here, these little ends that start to pull away. It can do that over time on some fabrics. So I could cut this out with my pinking shears, and that should help. Also, there's another way to cut things out, and you can just trim it around with your knife. This is what you need a special cutting mat to use this. You need a special cutting mat in order to use a rotary cutter, because it will cut your countertop. Don't do that. Your mom will be upset. Just don't. And I will show you that. I will maybe show you that option in the next video. So for today, let's just cut out this piece. And I've decided I'm going to use my pinking shears because cotton can fray. The edges can start pulling and coming apart. And unless you've got a special machine that wraps your edges, instead of just a regular sewing machine, you know, we should protect our edges. So I'm going to, if you can see, I'm just going to cut just right on the blue line that outlines this whole pocket. Just going to cut there. I'm not going to cut inside it. I'm not going to cut way outside of it. I'm going to use this as my guide and keep it as close to that line as possible. And because we doubled our fabric, I'm going to get both my pieces out of here that I need. I won't have to cut it again. So you just follow it. I'm just letting those teeth just kind of hit the edge of my line. You will have an easier time cutting because you won't be cutting upside down. But for the sake of the video, we're going to cut upside down. Make sure our pins are not in the way. I'm going to have to turn this in order to cut it. Bear with me. Make sure the other fabric's out of your way. You wouldn't want to accidentally cut it. Here we go. I'm just following the outline of my pocket. You'll see when I'm done how I cut this out. Now don't cut this line here because it says fold line. So if you were to cut off the fabric, you couldn't fold it. So make sure it's a cut line, and that's these solid lines around. It will specifically tell you what each line means, and we know this is a fold line, so we don't cut there. I'm going to cut this piece off, this right at the top here. Luckily it's small enough I could hold it up in my hand. Alright, there I have cut 2 pockets. When I am sewing, I don't totally take all the pins out of each piece. I want to kind of keep it all together so I know where everything's at as I sew. So I'm just taking it apart so you can see it now. You can see that's a pocket. And do you see how the edges are pinked with my pinking shears? And that's to help stop fraying. That fold line, this is why you cut above that fold line so you could fold it inside, and then you would have a nice finished edge at the top to slide your hand in and out. That's why we had that fold line. Alright. I'm not ready to sew yet, so, and you can see I have 2 of them. You can't always double your fabric to cut 2 pieces. This time I could. Alright, we're going to put our pieces together. I want to make sure I know where everything's at, so I'm just going to put a pin in the middle, and I'm going to set it aside as I cut all my other pieces. This way things don't get lost. Just set it aside. We will be using, we may be using some of this for our waistband. If not, we'll set this aside, and I'm thinking maybe I'm going to make a little mask. If I have enough fabric, I will make a little face mask to go with the apron. Okay, then you would do the same with these bigger pieces. This is a little more complicated because you have more to cut out of one piece. I'm just going to open my pattern. I'm not going to cut it all today. I just want to start you out. Remember, we have to follow our map. So which one are we doing? So your map shows you how to lay out your pattern pieces upon the fabric that you bought. And we're making apron A, which just is the lap apron, not the bib apron. And we're gonna find the piece 5 and 4. Here's my 5. Here is number 5. And here is number 4. If you're not certain where everything goes, refer back to the picture. 5 and 4 is going to be the bottom portion of this apron, the underneath portion. Since I want this to be the top portion, we won't cut that. We will cut this pink fabric. And on my pattern piece, or on my map, and I look at my pattern piece says center fold. Oh, we got another fold line, right? See how that is referring to this line as a fold? That means we don't cut there. That means we fold our fabric and use this as a guide to cut. I'll show you what that means. I'm going to need at least double the width of fabric. So once again, I'm going to fold my fabric. Here's my selvage edge. You can't hardly, it's hard to see from the front, from the right side of the pattern, from the right side of the fabric, but you can see it on the underside of the fabric. I'm going to fold this, and I'm not going to eyeball it, right? If we eyeball it, we could get it wrong. So here we have a fold. Let's see, do I have enough fabric? Yes, I probably have a little too much. I can go a little bit more narrow. I like to save as much fabric as I can. Sometimes you can use it for other projects. Okay. Let's see if we have enough. I'm going to lay this pattern piece on my fold line. Oh yes, I've got plenty over here. I could even go more narrow. Now I am going to measure, so trust me. Don't get too crazy. I'm not eyeballing it. I'm just making sure right now I have enough fabric folded so I can cut that piece out. Alright, let's see. If I lay it on the fold, do I have enough where I'm not going to use any of my selvage edge over here? Yes. It'll be just the right amount. Well, I need to make sure my fold is even. So, with my handy dandy measuring tape, move this down so you can see. I'm going to measure my fabric. Once again, we start at the top. Since this is a bigger piece of fabric, I'd like to kind of do it in 3 different places to make sure. What is this fold line? I got 11¼ inches from the edge of the selvage to the fold line. So now I want to go down here and measure from the edge of the selvage. Straighten out your fabric if it's not straight. 11, nope. Yep, 11¼ Ooh, I lucked out because the pattern on the fabric is helping me. 11¼ Wow. I actually got that one right. Right. Since we know we have a perfectly 11¼ since we know our fold is perfect, it's not running funny, the grain is running straight up and down, I can now lay my piece. Since this says center fold, you want to place this edge on your fold. And I'll show you why you don't want to cut that, because if you opened it up after you had cut it, you would have 2 pieces, you wouldn't have 1. So, once again, take your pin And this fold line is going to line up perfectly right along the edge of your fold line. So you're laying that directly on that fold line. You want to get it as perfect as you can on that fold line, just directly on that fold line. The edge of the fold line and the edge of the fold should match up. So top, and we are talking right on the edge. I mean on the edge. You can see, I can feel it even if I have to. Yep, the edge is right there along with my blue line. Okay, I've pinned that in place to keep it in place. You see that? All right, now you know that this pattern piece is running correctly on the grain line. And because we always follow directions so we don't get a wonky piece, right? All right, I am going to pin my corners. Now this pattern gives you many different sizes in one piece. If I wanted to make a size 3 or 4 for a 3-year-old or 4-year-old child, I would find the cutting line. See if I can show you. You see there's a couple different lines. We have a small dotted line, and we have numbers 3 to 4 with an arrow pointing to it. That's where you would cut if you're making a really small apron. If you want to make it for a 5 or 6-year-old, you would take the next line over, which are bigger spaced dotted line, and you would cut along that line. If you want to make it for a 7 to 8-year-old girl, you would follow the arrow over to this line. I'm just going to go ahead and make the large one. It's just easier. And I'm going to use my pinking shears. We can go ahead and place this too. I forgot about number 5. Number 5 says also to what? Center fold. So we know this edge has got to go on the fold line. And it also says in there, cut 1. So we only want one piece. Same up here. This says cut 1. So we only need one piece. So I am going to just place that right directly on the line. The blue line and the fold should match up. So pin that down so you get it correct, and then continue to pin around the rest of your fabric pieces. And I know I'm making the larger size, so I won't be cutting it on the dotted lines, a straight line, because I'm making 7, 8. So I'm going to cut this piece now, right along that edge. Don't cut inside the line. You want to cut just right along the line on the outside. Alright, I'm going to open this one so you can see. I also, up here is another edge to cut, so don't forget that. Right along that line. There you go. Well, got a little bit crooked. It's okay, you can clean that up. You just... Okay, there you go. Let's take our pins out just so we can see what we've got. Before I take it out, I want to cut my dart. You can see a little arrow. That's a dart. And this it is a little notch that you take out so you can line up other pattern pieces with it. Your other pieces of fabric, and they line up, and so you can get it just right. I'll show you that as we go along. It's hard to explain. It's just a really good guide. You want to make sure you notch that out. So let's notch that real quick before we take it apart. Just that little arrow. You're cutting inside that arrow. Okay. So you can see. Do that before you take the pins out. See how I just cut that? Okay. Let's take our pattern off just so we can see. Oh, look! You see how it's one whole piece? If we had not done this correctly, we didn't lay it on the fold, we would have had two pieces, and then you would have to sew your apron in the middle. We didn't want that. We want to be able to have just one piece for our apron that will be gathered. We're going to be gathering it in between those little notches. We'll get to that later. In future episodes, we will show you how to gather your fabric. And anyway, that will be your bottom piece for your apron. Isn't that cute? Okay, what do? Before we sew, since we're going to cut all our pieces first, make sure that you put your pattern piece back on and pin it to your fabric. So that when you set it aside, and then you later on when you start to sew, everything will be together. It's too confusing if you take everything off and just leave it off. Now, I'm just a firm believer in saving lots of fabric. You see how much fabric is wasted over here because I pinned this down? I'm the type who'll just like, nope, nope, nope. I want to use that fabric some other time for something. So, I am just going to pull this fabric over because I know I only need so much, and repin it. Okay, let's see. Measure again. Make sure you have your piece correctly folded. That's at 6.5. That's at 6.5. I'm going to lay my pattern piece right on there, on the center fold again, because we don't want to make two pieces, you just want to make one. So we're going to lay our thing down. We want to keep that correct. That just helps us to make sure our pattern doesn't move before we have time to cut it. Remember, I am measuring from the selvage edge over to the fold line, or over to the fold edge. And I'm just going to cut away. So I'm going to cut this piece out. Starting over here, cut this piece out. It's right along that edge. So I'm basically only cutting it on, I'm only cutting the fabric on 3 sides, because one side is our fold side. Don't forget, there's your dart. Let's notch that out. We're going to need that for later. Just inside. Don't cut too deep. Just right there where it says to cut. Careful you don't cut too deep. And there you have it. You've cut that out. This is the waistband. Of course, it tells us to cut one waistband. But it also says interfacing cut one. This is where our interfacing comes into use. Set your fabric aside. Grab your interfacing. Okay, I'm laying my fabric down on the shiny side of my interfacing just to make sure that when I cut it out, that the interfacing will be adhering to the wrong side of the fabric. And I see, oh, my little darts up here. Okay, good. If I lay my pattern piece like this, I know I will get it the right way up. You can also fold this too. Matter of fact, you should fold it because it's on the fold. So we do it like we do the fabric. This is easy to find a fold because these edges aren't matching up, so I know I'm okay. Alright, that's right on that fold. And since this is just a straight edge over here and it's perfectly straight, I'm just going to have to cut just two sides. So I've laid that on the fold. When you get good, you could probably cut like I do with no pins, but right now use your pins. This is a little less important than your pattern, than your fabric, but we want to get it as straight as possible. Okay, and I'm going to notch this out to just a little notch where it calls for. Notch. And as I open up my piece, I can see, aha, look, I've got interfacing. When I'm ready to attach my interfacing, I would put my fabric down on my ironing board. I would face down. Remember, the nice side is face up, right? Is the face, and this is the back. So when we say face down, you put the face down. I want to find my shiny side, because I know that's where the glue's at. Ah, here's the shiny side, and I cut it right. I'm going to put the shiny side down on the wrong side of the fabric. They also say right side and wrong side. The right side of the fabric, of course, is the nice side, and the wrong side is the back. I would then iron this in place, and the glue would activate, and it would stick. And then you would have a nice, crisp waistband when you're done. So, since they're all one piece, let's make sure we keep that together. Pin it together. All right, there you go. Okay, join me next time when we're going to continue on with our little project.